when it comes to nutrition, food, diet, supplements, our motto, as I mentioned, is test, don't guess. Test, don't guess. That's why also over the years and decades, relating to supplementation and diet and things like that, there's what's called anecdotal results, which means that when you take a supplement, for example, sometimes that supplement works on 3 people, but the 20 people after it take it, there's no effect at all. And that's called anecdotal. There should be something that if you're utilizing it on a patient or an individual and they take it, then it should have the same results on mass components of people. Same with food. That there are factors to consider in how you should be eating based upon sound science and biochemistry and physiology of your body. And if you follow that of what your body wants and functions best based upon your makeup, your physiology, your blood type, your blood chemistry, and also your ancestral familial lines. Because again, no matter what we think or believe, and this is not many individuals that I talk to, patients and others, based upon their spiritual beliefs about and feelings about animal protein and eating animals, don't eating animals, plant-based diet, and all of these things, I understand and I'm compassionate to that. But you know what? You can think about that all you want, but if your body's not built that way, it doesn't matter what you think or what your beliefs are, you're not going to function well if you eat a certain way. And I've seen this also over the course of my life and in practice. People eating based upon their principles, but eating the wrong way. And they're the sickest people. They were the sickest people that I found. People, for example, that were on a macrobiotic type of program, but for an extended period of time, and then all of a sudden they were worse from when they started. So I feel you probably know where I'm going with this. So you have to look at or have data that also has been tested on hundreds of people in the ability for it not to be anecdotal and to be able to produce sound results. So going back over the years and over the decades, as I began to explore and had varying mentors that I gravitated to, I came upon the work of William Donald Kelly. And Dr. Kelly was a dentist in Texas who had developed and came up with what's called metabolic typing, or the Kelly program. Dr. Kelly had story is that he had pancreatic cancer, and he had through his research and work adopted this program to understand how the body worked based upon the nervous system. And the nervous system, remember, is our brain, our spinal cord, our nerves, but the nervous system is broken down into what's called the sympathetic component part of the nervous system and the parasympathetic. And it's really very simple to understand. And I'll get to that in a second. So Dr. Kelly, coming up with this research of metabolic typing, cured himself of pancreatic cancer based upon him figuring out how our body functioned, whether or not an individual was more of what's called a parasympathetic dominant individual, which necessitated a certain type of dietary factor in the way in which we needed to eat, based upon whether or not, again, the individual is more parasympathetic dominant, sympathetic dominant, or more of a balanced metabolizer. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. And he developed, in his research, a way in which you could analyze a very a what's called a SMAC, a basic blood profile with the CBC and the differential, a very standard blood test that was used and is used by medical doctors and other practitioners over the years. Although a lot of the testing today, or blood testing, have become more sophisticated in the approach. And it just made a lot of sense to me, this Kelly work, and I began to adopt this work along with a close friend of mine who I went to chiropractic school with, Dr. Jimmy Sema, or James Sema, who's my best friend, who's down in Florida to this day. And Jimmy is a real wizard and crack of, crack Jack, I call him, in understanding biochemistry, and Cornell graduate, smart man. And Jimmy and I both really went headfirst into this metabolic program. And so in studying the Kelly work, we were able to use, Kelly had come up with so many tests on a blood test that had a numerical point value to it. And by taking the blood results and charting them with a point numerical, you could determine whether or not a patient or an individual is more what's called a sympathetic dominant, parasympathetic dominant, or a balanced metabolizer. So in understanding this, real simple, as I mentioned, we have the nervous system, right? We have the parasympathetic component of it, and we have the sympathetic component of it. And all that means is that the parasympathetic, there are certain glands and organs of the body that are more parasympathetic dominant, which means that parasympathetic glands and organs that slow functions down in the body. And the sympathetic is part of the system with organs and glands that speed things up. So glands and organs in the body speed things up, other glands slow them down. So obviously if there's a gland or an organ that should be speeding something up and it's slowing it down, that's going to create a problem, and vice versa. So when we would check these results and program it, we could immediately determine whether or not, again, the person was sympathetic or parasympathetic dominant. And what Dr. Kelly did is he determined that there were 16 specific metabolic types that an individual could be. And this is also what led to, today, which is so big, whether or not we need to be a paleo diet or a keto diet or a vegetarian-based diet, or a wide range of both components. So, because that's why, diet really is very simple in the way in which our Creator made it for us to eat. But because things have changed over the year, gluten, everybody's gluten, but it's the way in which wheat has been milled over the years, for example. It's really not so difficult. The abundance of I forget what the statistics are, but, the average person in the United States eats 5 pounds of sugar a year. And they drink too much, and all of these things that are really very simple in a way to figure out, which is why when you pull these foods out of our diet that are not natural in the way it was intended for us to eat, people in general, if they can make it through the first 5 or 7 days, they feel better, and but then we tend to go back to what it was that gave us that temporary pleasure and so forth. I'm not saying that. Point is, it really is all about balance and, consistency. One of the things many of you that are watching this tape know of my journey into bodybuilding at age 66 years old, which I did in 2018. And always being involved with diet and food and how it affected our body, I was blown away by, as I was dieting down and I was preparing for competition and building and so forth, the power of food I was never more made aware of by how it affected me in an hour, in 2 hours, when I removed this to make more muscle pop, or whatever. It was mind-blowing. So I really even had, after all of the years, more respect for the power that food and diet has on our body. And I understand, we're going through an international world pandemic. We've been confined. We're home. We tend to say, well, I'll get to it. What most people do not get to it. There has to be an effort on a daily basis in the way in which we eat, the way in which we think, the way in which we feed our mind, our spirit, all the things that that I'm about. So when I say test, don't guess, for example, a blood test, very specific in the way we analyze it, can determine immediately your metabolic type. So whether or not you think you should be eating, as I mentioned before in this video, you should be eating this way or that way, the science doesn't lie. The chemistry of the body says, this is how I need to eat. And again, it's also based upon, as I mentioned, your genetics, of where you're not going to make an Eskimo become a vegetarian, regardless of beliefs, principles. They need to eat blubber. A person that's of German, Irish descent is also not necessarily supposed to be a vegetarian. Certain cultures of the world ancestrally need to eat meat, regardless of what people say, don't say. So in these 16 metabolic types that can be determined, which will indicate the need for protein, the type of vegetables to be eat, and that also leads to, today, as I was mentioning, paleo, keto. Am I more keto, more paleo? You're not going to know unless you have the science behind it and the chemistry that can be determined through the blood work and the blood test system that we utilize in our practice. Type, whether indeed you should be paleo, keto, vegetarian, balanced metabolizer, can handle, so forth. For example, a parasympathetic dominant type 2, which are very common. So your parasympathetic type 2, 5s, and 7s, as an example, are more of individuals that need to eat root vegetables and protein. And when they eat too many carbohydrates or starches, and it creates an imbalance in the glycemic regulation in the body, these people, you continue to eat carbohydrate and sugar, you're going to lead to hypoglycemia, you're going to lead to blood sugar regulation imbalances that can lead to diabetes. Unless you know that, and you continue to eat that way, you're going to have a problem. And then you're going to develop insulin resistance, which leads to the body, instead of converting food into fuel, is going to store it as fat in your adipose tissue and your tissues. And this is what develops insulin resistance. It means that the more you eat carbohydrates and other factors, the body can't produce it. It can't produce or make the insulin fast enough to break it down and convert it into fuel. So the body